Hello and welcome to the Summer 2025-26 Web Development Technologies course. I am Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So this is the very first video lecture on for this course. This is week one, day one. And so I'm going to be going through a lot of basics here as far as the course introduction, go through Inside Rankin, how that works. I have some students that are returning students, so some this is their first time. So I'm going to go through that. Going to do a syllabus review. I want to talk about how grade weightings work, just to make sure there's no confusion on that, because some assignments are worth more than others. Also, I'm going to kind of go through the book. One thing that's kind of different, especially students who had me last semester, as far as the book was concerned, there wasn't really many assignments that came straight out of that book. Actually, I don't think there were any. But this one is a little different, where actually every chapter you will need to use the book for some assignments from every chapter. And then after I go through that, I'll go ahead and do a chapter one lecture. And if time permits, I'm going to go ahead and just do the written test for chapter one together. So, you guys, if you follow along, it shouldn't take very long. It's probably actually the simpler one of all of them. And so you can just follow along and you should get that done pretty quickly. If we don't get that done, I'll be moving that to tomorrow. And then tomorrow I want to go through Visual Studio Code, walk through just how to use Visual Studio Code. And some of the students who were in last semester, we use Visual Studio 2026. That's a different product. So you'll have to make sure that you walk through that, setting up your environment, and download the Visual Studio Code. Okay. And then I'm going to go through the chapter one lab and exercises tomorrow as well. And I'll do a couple of those for you, just to get used to using the tools such as like GitHub Desktop and Visual Studio Code and all of that. Okay. And after that, we'll go ahead and do a chapter two lecture, and I'll just walk through some of the chapter two homework assignments as well. So this is a little bit of a condensed. Summer's just a little bit shorter than the fall, so we kind of got to cram a little bit more into it. This first week, I know might be a little bit challenging. I know it kind of looks like a lot of assignments, but some of them are kind of simple. As far as our written tests, they're all about 20 questions. And I know last semester they were longer than that, so they should be a little bit simpler to get through, a little quicker. So, all right, so let's go ahead and I guess we're just actually going to go to Inside Rankin here. Bring that up. So this is AWD 1000. The course is Web Development Technologies. Class days, it's basically, all week long. It's an online course. So basically, you're going to kind of be doing your homework whenever you're available to do so, right? There's no select days that you have to do certain things. However, there are some due dates most due dates are on Sunday, but there will also be due dates during the middle of the week on some assignments. Okay, we'll talk more about assignments here as we go through this a little more. As far as the number of sessions, it's 14 weeks. As far as absences is concerned, you're only allowed 2 absences. On the third one, you will be the registrar's office will remove you from the course. And to get the way it works for absences, and I'll mention this again, is basically your attendance is taken once a week. Basically, it's on a Monday morning. So, and it's all based on you completing some assignments. So if you turned in a written test or you turned in some code, it's a very low bar for you to be considered present for the week. All you have to do is turn something in and you will be marked as present. Okay, so it's very simple. And One thing I always tell everybody, make sure you get something checked in early in the week. Get something done earlier in the week. So if you kind of get yourself in a situation where some emergency happens on a weekend, or you get involved in something, and then all of a sudden you don't get anything in, then you're going to be marked as absent. Okay, because generally there's really not any. We can't make special situations, unless it's some very, you know, some kind of event that's really, I don't know how, but something, really bad, obviously, yeah, maybe we can make some accommodations. But basically, you can't just say, well, I got involved in something or this or that, and I couldn't get it done, right? So you need to make sure you get something in every week. As far as getting a hold of me, there is a phone number here, but I suggest you really don't use this. It really just goes to voicemail. And I've had some issues with this occasionally, not actually getting the voicemail. So, really, the best way to get a hold of me is either by email, or you can contact me via the Discord channel. Okay. And Discord is that Discord channel is basically part of the joining the Rankin Discord course, and that's all in the setting up your environment. Okay, so either way, you can go ahead and contact me that way. As far as office hours, it's pretty much in the morning and then in the afternoons. Okay, Monday through Thursday for the most part. It's fine if you contact me outside of them. I'm just kind of, it might be a little bit of time for me to get back to you. But generally, if you, reach out to office hours, I'm probably going to get back to you very quickly. Okay. If it's outside of those hours, it may take me a little longer. Okay. Yeah, I forgot to update that, didn't I? Okay. So, course description. So this web-based course includes technologies needed to develop modern websites. Students will get hands-on experience in the latest HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. CSS is Cascading Style Sheets, and JavaScript. So this course will introduce you to cover current content management systems, accessibility concepts, web ethics, e-commerce, website search engine optimization, and mobile website technologies. Okay, so nowadays, really, with the frameworks and the different libraries, you can create a code base that will work across multiple devices. Years ago, that was much harder, but nowadays, with current tools, you can actually create something that'll work on mobile, tablets, desktop, etc. Okay. And so I do need to warn you that inside Rankin, it'll log you out awful quickly nowadays. So they have that kind of set up for security reasons. So you might have to log in. I have to log in multiple times every day. So, but okay, back to this. So the focus is to build the students' abilities and confidence through hands-on exercises and real-world projects. And so this course will provide a strong strong foundation for future web development. And this is kind of gets built upon in the second year course, which is database driven one course. So basically takes this course to the next level, so to speak. As far as course level outcomes, so students successfully completing this course will be able to write standard compliant HTML, CSS to structure and style a web page. Use CSS to position elements on a web page using responsive web design techniques, including Bootstrap, and we may actually be using another framework, which is called Tailwinds as well. Create websites that includes images, lists, tables, video, audio, icons, and animations. Develop web forms and use JavaScript. So the very first half of this course is all about HTML and CSS, and the second half will be we're going to be changing books to a different book. You don't need to worry about getting that book right away, but halfway through we're going to be moving on to a second book, and the main topic of that will be JavaScript. Okay. We'll solve problems using fundamental programming concepts, including variables, branching, and loops. So obviously, if you took the last course, it'd be a little easier because you kind of learned some of those concepts. Obviously, the new students, the good news for the new students is this is probably a little easier. This is an easier course than the C# course. So you're starting right now. The road's probably gonna be a little easier for you. Okay. And also manipulating DOM, which is the document object model. And the document object model is what you kind of see with when you look at a web page within a browser. The document object model is actually what's sitting behind that. You know that a user does not see really, but that is how this is how you can change and manipulate the web page using JavaScript and jQuery. Okay, instead of just the basic HTML, CSS, you can actually dynamically change that document using JavaScript and jQuery. And we will learn about that in the second half. So as far as course materials and text, textbooks. So here is the ISBN for this book, this first book. Okay, so please go through this. I would go ahead and follow this and walk you through the process to give you access to Cengage Mobile. And if you kind of actually go all the way down to bottom to get started, this is step one of the course to activate your Cengage Unlimited subscription. Okay, and so you'll want to go ahead and click this and launch your Cengage Basic. So please let me know if you have any problems with this. We've only kind of done this once before. In the previous course last semester, we used a different book. We didn't use Cengage, and I've only used Cengage one time actually before. We're kind of moving all of our books over to Cengage, but so let me know if you have any problems on this. Just kind of follow through there to get the book. And it's very important for you to have the book, like I mentioned, because a lot of these assignments are going to come right out of the book, and so you're going to need access to that. Okay, and that will be an online book. Okay, let's see what else here. So here's basically setting up your environment document. I'll also put the link here as well to the video. I forgot to put that. And then here's the YouTube playlist. So I suggest you bookmark this. And currently I have two different videos in here right now. I have kind of a welcome video that I did, about 10 days ago. And then, yesterday I did a web development technologies setting up your environment. So I suggest you watch that as well. Okay. And if you have any problems with setting up your environment, reach out, no problem. I'll schedule a quick meeting, online meeting, and we'll go through any issues that you may have. Okay. Here's the Discord server, and like I said, this is part of the Rankin course. As far as the Rankin program, I should speak. So there'll be different things in there. I'll go through that a little bit more some other day. I have not used it as much as some of the other instructors have. Some actually use it for their course within there. I've tended to do it a little bit outside of that. But okay. Then here's some online tutorials. You don't have to really worry about that right now. And that's about it. So, okay, next thing in here I want to kind of go ahead and take a look at. Should we go ahead and look at the syllabus first? Maybe we'll go ahead and look at the syllabus first and then come back. Here, since I'm here, it's setting up environment. So here's the setting up your environment. Like I said, I kind of walked through this document. Okay. The most important things in here are really making sure to really get started. A lot of these are very simple to get, but you really need to to install Visual Studio Code, because that is the tool we'll be using to write your code. And then installing Git is very important. Installing the GitHub desktop. And for all of the new students this semester, or who haven't had any AWD courses, what you'll need to do is you're going to need to set up a GitHub account. And once you do, please send me your username. Okay. And it's part of it's set up like this. It's github.com and then it's your username. So please send me that, because what I'll have to do is add you as a member. And so once I add you as a member, I will go ahead and send you an email with a link that you can join the GitHub Classroom. Okay. And once you do that, you'll be able to call what it's called cloning your code. You'll be able to clone the repository and be able to bring that code into your local machine and be able to start working on your code. Okay. And once again, if you have any problems with that, please reach out and let me know, and I will walk you through it. Okay. Let me bring up the syllabus here. So once again, this redundant from what's on the main page here, but do want to mention the maximum allowed absences is a 2. And like I said, all you need to do is submit some code, right? Commit your code, or or written test. So you just written test pretty much every week. So if all you got to do, and you'll do those through Inside Rankin, and I'll go through that here in a little bit more in depth. But you'll do that on Inside Rankin. The written test and the others, you're going to be using your the GitHub to submit your code. Okay, and that's outside of Inside Rankin. So once again, best way to get a hold of me is either through my email, or you can send me a message on Discord. And like I mentioned, this is the very first book, Responsive Web Design, which you use the main page to create the Cengage thing, and you should be able to access that from there. And you only need that one book. On the second half of the course, we'll be using this book, JavaScript for Web Warriors. And let's see. I suggest if you're a newer student, go ahead and look through the College Student Handbook. Here's a link to it. Do want to mention that all of these live lectures I do are optional to attend. They'll all be recorded and made available on YouTube. And once again, if you, for some reason, every Monday morning, if you haven't checked in, committed your code to the GitHub repository, or completed a written test or any other assignment, then you will be marked as absent for that week. And if you do that more than by the third time, the second time you'll get a warning. Third time, the registrar's office will just remove you from the course. So please make sure that you get something submitted. And like I said, try to get something submitted earlier in the week than later in the week, so you don't get caught in that situation. So like I said, like excused absences, there's really none. It's a little different from an online course. So one thing is, especially and also with the holidays and that, we really don't take that into, I do a little bit, I'm not going to Memorial Day will be coming up, 4th of July, whatever coming up. I try not to overload you too much. And anytime there is a holiday, if it falls on a normal lecture day, usually lecture days are going to be like Monday and Tuesday every week. Okay, and it all depends. Sometimes it get later in the semester. It may be just one day. Sometimes I just only have recorded videos at times. So that will kind of change a little bit. There's not lecture days every day. Usually it's like Monday and Tuesday, but most of the time you're just spending time working on your exercises, your labs, your exercises, and other assignments, right? And on those days, you can just reach out if you have any problems with anything, and I'll help you out, right? We'll go into that a little more in depth here in a little bit. But as far as like I was saying, as far as like holidays and that, really it's just you decide if if you some students end up work on holidays or end up doing their working on their assignments anyhow because it's a convenient time to do it sometimes, right? If there's not a lot going on that holiday, right? So it's up to you if you want to observe holidays. But as far as lectures concerned, I won't have a lecture on a holiday. Okay. Academic honesty. So you need to make sure that you're, doing the work yourself. You're not copying other students' work, helping other students cheat, etc. Right? Just pretty much the basics with that. Just need to mention that. Late work and retakes. So, and this has kind of evolved here a little bit. We're trying to be consistent with because like right now, at this point in time, there's another class going on for this specific course, and it's down in St. Louis, and it's an in-person class. So we try to follow along, pretty much both the syllabus and and kind of our rules and the way we do things, right? Just to be consistent. But so the important thing is here is, as far as like these kind of things, we kind of want to be consistent. So written tests cannot be retaken. So basically, you need to do that. It's usually going to be open on a Monday morning. Usually it's like 6 a.m. Sometimes it could be a little later, but it's going to be open Monday morning unless I make a mistake, which is possible. But it should be open early Monday morning, and for written tests, it's pretty much always going to be due on a Sunday. And it's usually 11:55, basically by midnight, right? By midnight every week. So you have a whole week that test is there. I think all of those written tests are going to be 20 questions, at least for the HTML stuff. I'm going to have to relook at the JavaScript stuff. But I think those are all 20. So you've got all week to do those, okay? So late work will not be accepted. Okay, so like let's just say you did not complete something. Okay, you didn't complete a lab assignment by the due date. Okay, so it's okay for you to go ahead and turn that in late. All right, but what you need to do is you need to message me. Please regrade this. Right. Please regrade this assignment. I have double checked my work, and I believe I have completed 100% of the assignment requirements, right? So if you do turn in something late, you have to make sure that you complete it. It's not that you might have an error in there. You might have done something wrong. It's just that sometimes students might just do partial just to get any kind of points. So if you turn in something late, you need to make sure that you did everything, right? You completed everything. And once that it's established that you have completed everything, you just get a 10% penalty will be deducted for being a late assignment. So if let's say you did something, everything was perfect, you would have gotten 100%. Instead, you'll get a 90% on that, right? Do want to mention, you do not want to get in a habit of doing that. Most of the time, when students start that and continue to do that, usually things don't end up very well. Occasionally, some student, if they don't get too far behind, they're able to dig themselves out. But most of the time, that is not what happens. So you need to really try to make sure that you can get your assignments done. Okay, if it happens now and then, that's okay. All right, but if your bulk of your assignments are done, you're probably going to be in good shape. You got one here or there, right? But if it becomes a situation where you didn't get anything done the whole week, it becomes much more alarming, right? Now, also we have what's called hands-on test, and I'll go through those here in a little bit as well. So in order to submit a hands-on test late, you must successfully complete all the lab assignments that prepared you for that test, okay? So, like, you can't just skip all the, if you do the first time you take your hands-on test, that's fine, okay? Even if you didn't get a lab assignment done, you can do the hands-on test. But if you didn't get the hands-on test done, and we go back and you're wanting to resubmit a hands-on test, you have to make sure that you completed all the lab assignments that are kind of associated with that hands-on test, okay? All right, next here is course grading. So here's the percentage breakdown. So the final project is worth 10%. All your hands-on tests are worth 40%, okay? And as you notice, that's a big number. So the hands-on tests are very important, okay? Very important to do well on the hands-on test. And some of these hands-on tests you might get it on a Monday and it'll be due Wednesday night, or you might get it on a Thursday morning and be due Sunday, okay? So you need to be vigilant about that. You need to make sure that you kind of know when your assignments are due, okay? For the most part, most of the assignments are going to be due on a Sunday night, but there will be some that will be due on others as well, okay? And then we'll have some homework assignments, and that's 20% of your grade. And these homework assignments are not from the book. These are done right in your GitHub. Even the ones out of the book are still done on your GitHub repository. But these ones are not out of the book. You'll have a separate sheet to work from for the homework assignments, okay? The labs called lab and exercises, these are directly out of the book. Once again, you will be using your GitHub repository for these. But these are, basically you'll need to use your book to complete those. The written test, these are on Inside Rankin. You take the test within Inside Rankin, okay? And to either later today, it'll probably end up being tomorrow, but either later today or tomorrow, I'll go ahead and do the very first written test for you for chapter 1, so you can, so you know that process, okay? Let's go through the scale here, and I'm going to go real quick. I'm going to kind of go back into Inside Rankin and just kind of show you the assignments that are due this week, just to review that now. And I'll show you the book a little bit as well. Overall scale, so basically 92.5 to 100 is excellent. That's an A. A B plus is 89.5 to 92. A B is 83.5 to 89.49, right? All the way down. The important one to remember, the most important one is the 74.5. This is considered a passing score. Even though, sometimes in school and stuff, D was sometimes a passing score but basically, if you receive a D, that is unsatisfactory and that is not a passing score. So by the end of the course, if you received a D, you would need to retake the course again, okay? And then obviously below 69.49 is failing. Okay, so I want to go ahead and spend a little time going through these just to show you that. Let me pull them up here. And obviously I have to log in here again, don't I? Let me do that real quick here. Okay. So I want to go over to the main course page. And I'm going to go to coursework here. I'm going to change my view to be a student view. So this is how it should look for you guys. So first I want to mention in here, so this is basically what's really due for the week. Okay, this will also be on the and within the syllabus. When I go back to the syllabus, I'll show you it's also be there. They should be in line, but this is kind of more, I'd say, the official one. The due next, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is always going to be what you're going to want to do next all the time. Okay. Obviously, if something's due midway in the week, that would end up being the first one on the list. So sometimes it will be relevant. Like here, because we have multiple that are due this week, all of them are due at 11:55. So it's not necessarily you have to follow in this order. Okay, it all depends on how you're comfortable with doing it. Some students rather do a written test. You know, get through the chapter, get through the logic stuff, and take their written test, then do their coding. Other students rather do their coding before they do the written test. And so it's either way you want to do it. But if you come down here a little farther, so here's chapters 1 through 3. And as you can see, each one of these are designated what kind of an assignment it is. These are all the written tests. Right, written test 1, chapter 1, 2, and 3. Like I said, the first one I'm going to do in class, and then you'll be responsible for the number 2 and number 3. Okay, and these are all of these are due on Sunday, basic 11:55 by midnight. The written test, you need to make sure, you do absolutely get it in by that exact time, no later than that. Because it will, once it's done, it's done. It kind of automatically just grades whatever's there and locks it, right? So you'll need to make sure you do that, okay? Now, the other ones, there's going to be some that are going to say labs and some are going to say homework. So this one says lab here, right? These lab ones are going to come straight out of the book. The lab ones, you'll be using the book, okay? The homework ones, okay, there'll be additional homework ones. And let me click on that. And, well, actually, I should have clicked on the other one as well. You'll have a separate sheet. And we use Google Drive, right? We use Google Docs and so forth for our assignments. So you should have access to it. You don't need special access, really, as long as you've got, basically any Gmail account helps. But, you'll have access to it because I make it available to everyone. So you won't have to do anything special with that. And so, we'll go through this a little bit more later on as well. But this tells you where in your GitHub repository that goes. Okay. And here's the different assignment. All right. Okay. And we'll touch upon this later as well. If we go back here, I want to go back to the assignment list. And then if I go to one of these labs, this is the first one. It will also have a document as well, but the document in here is telling you where you need to go to for the assignment directions, okay? And so this will be inside your book. And I do want to mention the book numbers for these assignments. They vary. They may vary slightly, just because the book. I guess what I used, the book I used, is kind of more of an instructor version, I guess, and so that it's not always exactly in sync. So, but once you get used to the sections, there's the apply your knowledge, extend your knowledge, and we'll go take a look at this here in a minute. But there's these different ones, okay? And so what you'll be doing this is you're going to go in your GitHub repository when you have that local, right? Your local GitHub repository, you'll be going to this place, and then you'll be completing that assignment, okay? And then there is a couple that will be, we'll have, and I'll just show you here this real quick, I guess. These are in a little different location as well, okay? Let me go grab that real quick here. I'm going to go grab the, I'll just show you it on my machine, I think. Okay. So next thing I want to go over here is the workload table. So this is the basically kind of what the amount of hours you're going to spend. So basically, all of these courses, all of the AWD, application web development courses, are all based on 14 credit hours. Okay, and 14 credit hours is considered 320 contact hours. So those hours are broken up as follows here. So basically, instructor-led lectures, discussions, theory, some miscellaneous YouTube videos. All of that will be about approximately 80 hours. Okay. Out of class preparation, basically reading. So basically, you're reading your textbooks, any other. I also have some other guides as well. And so those are kind of for reading. So that's it's about approximately 40 hours. Okay. And then written test, homework, written test, and test hours. So this is basically your written test and your hands-on test. Okay. And then there will be approximately 80 hours. Lab. So these are all basically all your lab assignments. So that was basically the homework. When we say lab, basically your homework and that. So in the day class, they always, they have what they call lab hours. And so the instructor's still there and the students are working on it in class. Kind of a little different for us since we're online. For us, basically, lab hours are just for you to do any of your work, right? You could, during lab, I look at this as kind of all together for us. For online, it's basically just for you to do your work, read your chapters, read the quick guides, do all your coding, take your written test, etc. Pretty much all lumped together, right? Let's see, one thing I wanted to go back to real quick. As far as grading is concerned, I want to go through this real quick. So, just to make sure everybody understands about how the weighted grading works, okay? So basically in this course, you're gonna have like final project, you'll have hands-on test, homework, labs, written test, right? Ones we've already talked about a little bit, right? So for the hands-on test, it's 40% of your grade, okay? Now, so I've got these all marked as 80, right? So basically 80% of your, well, basically this is the total points available. And this isn't an exact number, okay? How it is, and it's probably going to vary a little bit because there might be, we might skip an assignment, we might add a little assignment here and there, but for the most part, it'll be somewhat like this, okay? But this is like total points available, and these are, this is just an example of a points awarded, right? I'm just making up an example, and in this case, it's you got 80% on everything, right? But how it kind of works with weighted grades, so the final project is just one project. It's actually, I believe it's 100 points. So it's 100 points, but it's worth 80% of it's worth 10% of your grade, okay? 10% of your grade, right? So point I really want to get across here is I wouldn't get caught up on points too much because really with a weighted grade, it doesn't matter. This is only 100 points, but this is 10% of your grade, right? So all your written test, all your written tests together, okay, is worth the same amount as your one final project, right? And as you can see, this is how this does. It takes let's say you got 80% of your final project. Well, 10% of that's 8, right? If you got a hands-on test and you got 80% on all your hands-on test, you're going to get a 32 out of that, right? Because you're using this weighting, right? So that shows you how important the hands-on tests are, okay? And I wouldn't get too caught up in points, okay? Because something will say 100 points or 50 points, right? Let's just say all of the hands-on tests together were 100 points, okay? I'm just an example here, right? And I do an 80 here, right? It's the same thing, right? Even though, you know, you got 2,400 for labs, you know, you got all these points for there. If you only had, let's say you had 10 hands-on tests and they're worth 10 each, right? Well, the lab's worth 100 points. That's much more important. No, it's not. It really isn't, right? Since it's 40% of your grade, right? That's your 32 there, right? It took your 40% times your grade and that, right? So the total points is kind of really irrelevant for the most part. Now, where it does come into play is, let's just say one hands-on test is worth, you know, 100 points and another hands-on test is worth 200 points. Well, yeah, the 200 points is going to affect your grade more, right? Same thing with a lab. So, you know, you're going to have lots of labs, right? You're going to have more labs than anything, okay? But you'll have some homeworks as well. But if one lab is worth 200 points and the other is worth 100 points, right? Obviously, the one worth 200 is going to affect your grade a little more, right? But like I just said, though, you just don't get caught up in then you know that you're more worried about labs than you are your hands-on tests. Your hands-on tests are going to be much more 40% of your grade. Okay, I hope that makes sense. But that's how we handle the weighting. And then obviously early on, if you struggle a little bit early on, it's going to look a lot worse for you. If you progress and you keep at it, your grade kind of evens out as you go because there's a lot more points, right? Early on, it's you can have a very high grade or kind of a low grade at the beginning because you're just starting out, right? It really matters when you start really getting through. And that way, actually, towards the end of the course, your grade doesn't change that much because you've got a lot, you've already got a lot of grades up to that point. So a little bit changes towards the end doesn't change things too much, right? So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any other questions about that, but I'm just making a point. Don't get caught up too much in how much each assignment is worth points wise. It's really, the important thing is you want to do well, right? What's my percentage grade that I'm averaging on this work, right? And then obviously, as you can see, hands-on tests are worth a lot, right? Now, obviously, so hands-on tests are worth the same as both homework and labs all together, right? But you're going to have a lot more points, okay? And obviously, this is not. I think this is going to be like a 900. I was just making an example, okay? So, just for illustration purposes. All right. So let's go through some of this. We do have a tutor that's available. I do need to follow up with him to make sure he still is, but I do. So if you need any assistance, if you have any problems with anything, I can help you out. Also, sometimes the students feel more comfortable working with the tutor than I do, than me as an instructor. Sometimes they don't want to admit they don't know something or whatever, but I don't judge. If you need any help, let me know. As far as the tutor, I will go ahead and I'm going to follow up with him, and I'll send out his contact information if you choose to use them. And feel free to use them. A lot of students, for some reason, they feel like self-conscious about it. They're there for that reason. So please do use them. And if you have any kind of special needs or anything like that, any help with anything, please, you can contact Patrick Len. And I'm sure all of you probably know him because he's the admission counselor for the online course for this. So you should know, I'm sure all of you know who he is. Any kind of additional assistance with anything for admissions, your concerns about the course schedule, obviously if you have some accommodations that need to be made, a little different from an online course than an in-person class, but if there are some special accommodations, please reach out to him. and also career services as well, I guess. We also have a career center, and I'll speak about that more in the future here. And once again, I suggest you go ahead and take a look at the student handbook if you have any questions about anything. Most important thing is, just teach, do your work, treat everybody with respect, follow the basic rules, right? And you'll be good to go. Okay, as far as the course schedule is concerned here, so this will be updated, okay? So these are kind of the getting started task. I got a quick questionnaire I'd like you to fill out if you don't mind. As far as, I kind of asked what kind of computer, and I kind of went over that a little bit in environment, setting up your environment. Because actually this course here, the web technologies course, probably least resource intense as far as from a computer hardware perspective. The C# is a little more. You're using like Visual Studio 2026. I know some students, if you have had, some older computers and stuff, and they kind of have some challenges with running some of that stuff. Okay, so it's kind of beneficial. I know, having computers it's not cheap necessarily, but it's really important for this program, especially get into the second year as well, to have some pretty good hardware, a lot of space to be able to do things, right? A lot of good amount of memory and a lot of good amount of disk space as well. But that was part of the questionnaire. I was asking about your computer. Watch your. This is the welcome video and setting up your environment. Here's both a document and a video. Just note that all live lectures are optionals, and I will record them and put them out on YouTube. Here, if there ever is any discrepancies, please let me know. But I try to keep this in sync with what's in inside Rankin. So basically, for this week, we got 3 chapters. And kind of what I do, I was talking about that 320 contact hours. So I kind of use that as kind of a guide for, how much work. And, we're going to be doing like 320 contact hours within 14 weeks. So, it comes out to, around 23 or more, probably with some holidays and stuff, which, really shouldn't factor in. But, you need to probably think about spending 20, 25 hours. And there's going to be some times you might be struggling to have to spend some more than that. But, I kind of keep that in consideration. I kind of figure it takes you about an hour to read every chapter, right? I figure about an hour to do every written test, which many students do a lot faster than that, and so forth. So that's kind of how I come up. And I know this is probably a lot this first week. Please get started. Don't get too frustrated with it. I'll touch if you do. I'll touch base with you later, with everyone later, see how everyone's doing. Because I know this is a lot, but it's kind of important for us to read. Chapter 1's pretty simple, and some of these lab exercises that are in the book are pretty simple early on here. Like I said, I'm going to do the first written test for you, so some of this stuff I'm going to be helping you with as well. Okay. So in addition to the book chapters and obviously the the different assignments, I also have these quick guides. And so let me just kind of go to that real quick. So here's some quick guides, and I kind of got a little head start on some of these. So guide 1 basically associates with chapter 1. The reason I did that is in case we kind of change some stuff with books or stuff like that. I don't want to always have a chapter 1 and maybe it doesn't sync up right. So I just made it guide 1, guide 2 instead of chapter 1 and chapter 2. And actually, I will be kind of going through these as well. It's kind of part of lecturing. But these are some different guides that can help you. I always have mine a little larger for presentation purposes. But these little guides will provide you a lot of information that you're kind of need for, especially the written test, and can help you with the, especially when we start this first one. It's really a lot of logic and about how the internet works a little bit, right? As opposed to we start getting into some later chapters, there's a lot more coding related, right? But go ahead and I will send this separate because I usually just send the individual ones, but I'll send this and you can also have that available that you can always use that as the home page so you could go to the different guides. But I generally always just send the individual ones links. But these should really help you out as well, okay, with assignments as opposed to just the book itself, okay. I kind of created, this isn't from the book, I've kind of created these outside of that, right? But these should be pretty, really help with the written test, and like I said, they should sync up nicely with the assignments as well. Did want to mention, now that I was just thinking about it, some of these homework ones, some of these were kind of created prior to this, us using this book. This is kind of the second semester we used this book. Prior to that, for this course, prior to that, we used a Muroc book. We used a different book. And so some of these assignments were created based on other materials and stuff, but there may be a couple things that might be a little bit different, but it really shouldn't be too much of a problem. If something's out and because all the stuff is the same, HTML is HTML, CSS is CSS, right? So there's not a lot, but there might be a couple things where there might be a little bit more of an advanced concept or something that you don't understand. But that's a reality too. You need, if it's something that wasn't covered, you need to research that a little bit, okay? If something sticks out and you're really confused about it, please let me know on that, okay? But here, I'll be updating this. I wouldn't go too far in advanced on this, okay? I wouldn't get too far ahead on this, so to speak, because this could change a little bit depending on how things are going and so forth, okay? But, next week, pretty much our first hands-on test. And I'm trying to, I kind of got this from, I started with the one from the last semester with this course, and that was actually a 16-week course, right? It was in the fall. This one is actually, the summer course is for 14, so we have to condense it a little bit. That's why I kind of have a little bit more here on this first week, because we really kind of got to get off to a good start, right? Once we get rolling, we should be in pretty good shape, though, okay? But like I said, don't get too far. Don't worry about this, because this is going to change. Some dates are going to change. I'll be moving some of this stuff around, and I don't even have anything for our JavaScript stuff. I'm going to have to pull that in, okay? So this is just something to get started with, but hopefully, by every Monday morning, I should have this updated for that week, right? Okay. So please let me know if you have any questions about the syllabus, attendance, etc. As far as the assignment stuff, we'll be going through that a little bit more tomorrow. And I'll walk through, doing assignment, how you start it, and all the steps that are involved in that. All right, let's see here. Next. Okay, so I want to run through the book a little bit, and then from there, go ahead and walk through chapter 1. So once you get things set up, you should have, like in your library, you should have the book, and so obviously I got a couple extras here, but you'll have this one later on. We'll go ahead and get this one, right? But right now, you just need a responsive web design with HTML and CSS. So let's go ahead and take a look at this a little bit, and we'll go through this more tomorrow as well. I don't know why it's doing that. It might be logged me out already. I don't know. Or it's just slow. I don't know. Okay. So so the way this works, you got your left navigation here on the left hand side, your left side. So each one of these is a chapter, right? And then if you like, so here is module Introduction to Internet and Web Design. This is our first one, right? If you come down to apply your knowledge, right? So there'll be different ones. I'm just kind of going just talking about a little bit about assignments. You have you apply your knowledge, extend, analyze. So you'll have this for each one of your lab exercises for each chapter, right? So you'll have to use this. It tells you what to do. Open up your text editor, create, it tells you where to put it, okay? It tells you where to put it. And that was all within our directory structure there, which I kind of closed already. So it's basically telling you to go to Data Files, Chapter 1, Apply, right? And that where you'll do your homework. Obviously, we'll be bringing this up in Visual Studio Code, but just kind of wanted to point that out. So, but this is what you'll have to do. You'll have to come in here, and the bad thing is a lot of this stuff, it won't, if you wanted to try to copy this and that, it's, maybe you can find a workaround to some of this, but a lot of times you're going to have to actually just come in here and do some typing of things. A lot of things, it will not let you just kind of cut and paste it. They're images. They kind of do that on purpose. Okay. Some things you may be able to copy. Other things you may not be able to copy. Okay. So, but this is what you'll be doing for each assignment, right? For each chapter. So like that was chapter 1, you'll go to chapter 2, but you'll be doing the apply, and it'll be the same for the other things as well. Okay. Consider this your turn. The portfolio website, we are not going to do that. This is one that we did as part of the previous previous semester for this course when we used the book for the first time. But what happened kind of when we got to the end, I didn't really realize what it was going to look like until we got to the farther along, and I just said, that's not going to be good enough, and so I figured it was kind of waste. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to create a portfolio. This will be our midterm. We'll be creating our personal portfolio. Okay, and that way you'll kind of know some more stuff by then. You'll be able to create a better portfolio, right? So we're just going to kind of do that later. And so you just kind of follow what it tells you in those directions. So that was like, but we are going to be doing the dog grooming. Okay. So you can skip the portfolio. We will be doing dog grooming. It's all in the directions. Right. And then this one here was kind of a collaboration thing. It's just kind of hard for us to do this within an online course with, working with classmates and so forth. So we're going to be skipping that as well. And actually, they skipped that well in even the in-person class. And then, so that was consider your turn. What's this? In your lab. And then we also have strike a chord, right? So I'm just kind of showing you, this is basically, it's going to tell you what to do. You're going to have to follow along and do what just follow along for each one, okay? But, early on, these are going to be really, really basic. I wonder if it lets you copy that one. Probably not. But, okay. So that's how that's going to kind of work, okay? Just we'll go through this, like I said, tomorrow I'll go through a couple, but just kind of wanted to give you a first glimpse on what this is going to look like, okay? All right, so next we're going to go ahead and work on Chapter 1 lecture. Get that pulled up here. Okay, so basically, designing the digital architecture. So from internet infrastructure to HTML frameworks. Okay, it's kind of a introductory slide here, just kind of showing you a way to look at some things where you basically HTML is based on different sections. You have like a header section, you have your main content, you have sidebars, footers, right? It's kind of showing you that this is all part. Basically that all these things are part of the infrastructure. This is running on top of the infrastructure, which is basically the internet infrastructure, right? Where you've got different protocols. And when we talk about protocols, you're talking about, I'm sure you've all seen HTTP, right? HTTP. Well, HTTP is a protocol. It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, right? So your pages, your web pages are going to be running, if it's deployed on the internet, which the stuff we're going to be doing is going to be mostly towards the end will be, your web portfolio, we're going to get that out there. We're going to get that out there on what's called GitHub IO. And so it'd be GitHub pages. So we'll actually get that out there so you can actually access that via the internet. But a lot of stuff we'll be doing basically locally on your machines, and you'll be viewing it, right? We're not really deploying a lot. But in the real world, when you're deploying applications, when you're deploying websites, it's going to run on the internet infrastructure, right? And so there's a lot to that. We're going to discuss a few of those things, but this is not really an infrastructure thing. We're just going to be class, but we're going to be just kind of doing a high level on that. Okay. So basically, the internet, the foundation is separating the infrastructure from services, right? So basically, this is just an idea of you got internet backbone, right? You've got all these lines, right? All these data lines that are fiber optic cables, that carry the internet across from state to state, from country to country, through, across oceans and everything else, right? High speed internet, right? The internet backbone, right? And then you have what's called ISPs, right? That's where you're usually always going through an internet service provider. It could be Spectrum. Nowadays, there's a lot of fiber cable operators. There was Spectrum, AT&T. Them were the early ones, right? Especially AT&T was a really early one. But over the phone, you used to use the phone lines for internet. Then they started bringing cable into homes, and then you went through that, right? Now we're up to fiber as well, right? But within the and also besides internet provider, you also have kind of what's called the different nodes, different physical devices, computers, phones. IoT stands for Internet of Things, right? So there's all these things that live right on top of that hardware within that, right? And then there you've got services, right? So your services run on top, right? So you got the World Wide Web, right? These are all web pages, right? So, and even though you might think of email being email's really not part of the HTTP. It uses a different protocol, right? Voice over IP, FTP. So really, they run on the internet, right? They run on the backbone, the internet backbone, but they're not really they're not web, right? When we're talking about web, we're talking about web pages. Even though nowadays a lot of these different things are integrated within web pages, right? But the actual protocols to run email, voice over IP, FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol, right? There's that other protocol word, right? File Transfer Protocol, right? So them are all separate protocols, right? HTTP is the web protocol, right? So the web is just one of many software services riding on top of the physical internet infrastructure. Okay. So not all websites are open to the public. Okay, access is defined by architectural boundaries. Okay, so the internet, what everyone's used to using, right, for the most part, is public, right? Public, anyone can access it, right? Public facing information, e-commerce, general web browsing, etc. Right? And then you have what's called the internet. Okay, so the internet is a private organizational network, right? So it has, basically HR policies, internal company directories, all this stuff. A lot of schools, big campuses could have, big campuses for schools, big campuses for corporations have the internal intranet, right, that they can use. Sometimes back a long time ago, actually, they used to just have everything hardwired together, right? They just had a big network, right, of all the cables tying all the computers together, and that was their internet. But the intranet can run on the internet, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to. If you just had basically your own house, you could connect all your computers together with lines, and you could have your own internet, right? So, but intranets are very usually corporate employees, sometimes for schools and so forth. But intranets usually, they're private, they're organizationally related, right? Now, an extranet is kind of a trusted outside thing, okay? So everyone don't have access to that, right? It's a limited extension of the internet, right? It's for B2B, and B2B is business to business collaboration. So sometimes there's partners and suppliers that actually get on an extranet, right, to order things, to communicate back and forth with suppliers and partners and different companies like that, right? It's outside of the typical internet, right? So it's kind of a separate architectural boundary, so to speak, okay? But there's a difference, right? Internet's public to anyone. An intranet is basically an internal one, usually for employees, private organizational network, right? An extranet's usually a limited extension of an intranet to also allow outside partners, right? Outside of a company or organization. So here's the protocols of digital communication. So HTTP is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, and what a protocol basically is a set of rules. Right. So all browsers like Chrome, Edge, Firefox, etc. They have to they've been built to handle and the HTTPS protocols, right? They have to follow certain rules. This is how things work. These are the kind of error messages. I'm sure everyone's got a not found message, right? A 404 message and things like that, right? So, all these different, there's all these other different status codes and stuff. There's a lot to these protocols, these rules of how you access things, how you show things, etc., right? Are all based on the HTTP, these different protocols, right? So companies who want to use that have to follow those rules, right? So, like I said, HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's basically the protocol of the web, right? And so, and to backtrack just for a minute, it's always easy. Everybody always thinks of the internet, thinks the internet is the web, and that's not really the case, right? The web actually runs on top of the internet, right? And like I mentioned, there's other protocols, right? So the HTTP protocol runs on the internet, right? And like I mentioned before, there's like the FTP. There's lots of different protocols, but we've seen the voice over IP, email. Email's a different protocol, right? But nowadays, some of that stuff's integrated within the web, And behind the scenes, you don't really know. It's kind of all looks, seems like the web, but in reality, it's a separate protocol. Okay, but so those other protocols also run on top of the internet, right? But they're not necessarily web. Okay, when we talk about web, we're talking about HTTP or HTTPS, right? So HTTP, basically transfers web pages, text, multimedia between browsers and servers. It's unencrypted, standard communication. Okay. Nowadays, well, wasn't that long ago, obviously I'm older than all the students listening to this, but it wasn't that long ago you could still really do HTTP, but now, man, the browsers usually complain if it's this is an unencrypted standard, this is unencrypted. Are you sure you want to access this, right? So nowadays, almost everything's going to be HTTPS, so it's secure, right? So it's basically running HTTP over what's called a secure socket layer, right? So it encrypts the transfer of data. Okay, so your data is encrypted from leaving, and obviously, if you ever filled out a form, if you ever put a credit card information into it, you never would want to do that over HTTP because anybody could basically, if they have the right tools, they can pick up that transmission, right? They can pick up that transmission and read every part of that transmission if it's HTTPS, right? But if it's HTTP, I apologize. If it's HTTPS, right? It's encrypted, right? So that's what you want. It's required for any site handling logins or payments, right there, right? FTP is called a file transfer protocol. It uploads and downloads bulk files between a client and a server. Okay, it's used for publishing site files to a host. Now, a long time ago, so it's still used, but as far as from an individual person using it, not so much. A long time ago, and actually you can still do it, but you could register a new domain, right? And you can actually FTP your files up to that. Usually it's done differently nowadays, right? But years ago, basically that's how you had it. You had all your files sitting on your computer. You got this domain host. You want to, so that you've got your own internet website, and you wanted to get the files from your computer over to that website. You would FTP those over there, okay? Not to say it's not still used, but it's, from a individual person standpoint, quite not usually. Nowadays, there's other tools and resources to do things like that, okay? TCP/IP, right? This is the Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, right? This is the foundation suite that breaks data into packets and routes them and reassembles them. So when you send something over the internet, right, you're not sending all that stuff all at one time. It actually is broken up into individual data packets. It can route in different things. It reassembles them and then delivers them. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? But yeah, things get broken up into packets, right? It's not just not like everything that you send is just sent all in one. It's broken up into data packets, and it's routed, and they get reassembled for delivery to wherever the destination's going. That's how the internet works back and forth. Okay, very quick. We at a blink of an eye, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Okay. So it's considered kind of like make an analogy here, the global postal system, right? So the request and response cycle, okay? So basically, you start with a client like a browser, right? So what happens is when you go and type in a internet name, right? Whatever it be. Let's say ESPN, okay? ESPN.com, okay? So the basically really all those IP addresses. Okay, there's actually an IP address that's associated with a a location. Okay, a location where some web resources are. Okay, there's an IP address, right? But because like something like ESPN doesn't tell about the location, it's just a name, right? So what actually happens is you use what's called DNS. Okay, it's the domain name system. Okay, and it's basically the internet's phone book. It translates a domain name to an IP address. Okay, so if you type in ESPN, it calls DNS, right? It says, okay, give me an IP address for this. Gives it an IP address, and that's associated with a specific web server. Okay, that's the simplest form, right? The simplest way to explain it. Behind the scenes, a little more complicated, especially with a very large site. It could be routed to different web servers, right? Especially with clouds, things are done a little differently, right? But still the basic concepts are still applied, right? You basically enter a name, and that name gets translated to a certain IP address, right? So it can access that web server, right? Once you access that, it takes that request and responds that back, right? So it could be just a simple request, show me the homepage, right? So you just go to ESPN.com, boom. It's going to do the DNS. It's going to just say, okay, user wants the homepage, and it returns it, right? Maybe you click a link on that homepage that goes to a different page, right? Well, same thing happens, call DNS, right? It's going to still do the same thing. Some of the stuff is cached now, it's a little more sophisticated than that, but basically, I'm just talking about the response, the cycle here. You go into that web server and you're requesting a specific resource, not just a homepage. It's going to return all that HTML. Basically, what's returned is HTML, CSS, and for our purposes, this first half is just HTML, CSS, but it's also going to be JavaScript as well, right? Them are the web technologies, right? HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So anything that's part of all them are all the web technologies, right? It's going to return those back to the browser. Browser knows what to do with those. It knows how to display those, right? So basically a URL, right, is broken down into first your protocol, in this case HTTPS. Then you can possibly, a lot of times you just have your domain, like Microsoft.com, your domain, and your top level domain, .com, could be .net, .info, .edu, right? There's different TLDs, which are top level domains, right? And here's your domain name is Microsoft. Sometimes you have what's called a subdomain, and them are all, if you ever see something before the domain name, by looking at it, oh, that's a subdomain, okay? So now that you know that, you'll be able to look and say, oh, yep, that's a subdomain. They're doing that, right? Then after that, you're going to a specific path, right? Help Windows. So when you go to that web server, it's going to pick that up. It's going to find, okay, it's looking for help. So usually this is directory structure path, right? Within the web server. Oh, help, yep, Windows. It knows, it finds those, and it returns, the page that's needed, right? So let's talk about a little bit about planning a website, okay? Building without planning results in clutter, unmaintainable architecture, right? So the important thing when you plan a website is, what's the first thing is what's the purpose? What is your goal, right? What's the goal of this website? Or is it to, provide information about some specific topic? Is it to take some certain action? Is it to submit some kind of a forms, or, what's the purpose of it? Is it a registration? Is it information? There's lots of different goals, right? So it's driven by the organizational mission statement usually, right? to, well, that's kind of a main page, a main website. Yes, I agree, but that's not always the case. But I'll go along with it. So, what is the goal? It's driven by the organization's mission statement. To sell, raise awareness, entertain, whatever. What is the company's goal, right? So that's the main page is going to represent that, right? Who's the audience? Who will use it? It defines what's the skill level of the person using it. So if you're creating if there's a website about that's for technical users, for software developers, then you're going to you're going to be able to expect that the technical abilities of those are going to be a lot higher than just the general population, the general people using it, right? Could be kids, little young kids using it or whatever, right? So it's going to be different depending on who your audience is, right? And then you want, whenever you have a website, you want it to be successful for whatever reason. I mean, even if it's marketing your company, if it's used, to perform certain functions, what measures its success? You planned, you got a purpose, you got an audience. How do you measure its success? It's defined by concrete metrics like, make purchases, Amazon, right? Signups, downloads, everything else, right? How do you measure success for this website? So there's different site structures. Okay. When you build out a website, you kind of have to determine what it's going to be like, right? So if you're doing a tutorial, an onboarding thing, something where you need to do the first thing before you can do the second thing, etc. Usually a lot of online courses that are completely web based. You have to go module 1, then module 2. You're going through each step, right? And that's in a linear type format, right? Hierarchical, right? So this is kind of the most common. You can have your main page, and you have a bunch of different, you have some different links on there for different parts within there. Usually there's some logical way to follow, but they're not all interconnected necessarily, right? And this is the most common. Now, webbed is pretty much everything is related to everything else. And it's kind of like encyclopedias and wikis and things like that. You click on something and it links to this thing and links. You can start clicking on things for you're linking to all kinds of things. So wikis are very good at that, right? Where it's just basically links of links, pages of links to other pages of links, right? Over and over again. That's called webbed. Drafting the schematics, site maps versus wireframe. Okay. So site map. So a site map is basically usually you can kind of go down to a lot of times on websites. Probably not as much as they used to. They used to kind of have them always there. Sometimes you have to root for it. But if you usually go down to the very bottom of a page, usually have some kind of a site map. You can click on it. It shows you how to navigate the different places within the website, right? Kind of has how it's connected because websites have grown. They can be kind of complex, and so sometimes you can't just look at a front web page and figure out where to go. Well-designed ones usually do that a little better, right? But so site map here is a macro view. So you basically have a home page, and you have some other page, maybe like an about page about the company, what services, a contact page. Basically a simple little site map, right? No fancy software required, right? Pencil and paper work perfectly for both phases. So that's just a site map, okay? A wireframe. So what's a wireframe? A wireframe is and in this course we'll definitely be, you'll have an opportunity to create some wireframes. So what wireframe is just kind of a, there's tools to do that where you just kind of create, you start out just, you don't know what you're going to really do, right? So you just kind of create some skeleton structure and how this might look, right? And you kind of just kind of keep on iterating it through it, right? So, like here's a basic wireframe here for a mobile where you got a header at the top, a navigation bar to click on things. Usually you got this big hero image and, towards the top as well. Then some body content. At the bottom you have a footer, right? And not just for a phone, but, this basically, and there's a lot of different frameworks that we can use that will have it provides what you need, so it'll work across devices, right? Obviously you got to set things up that way, right? But they help get you in that direction, right? Long time ago they used to have completely different completely different code for depending on what kind of a format you're using. If it's a phone, if it's a web page, desktop web page, it's a tablet. It used to, there's sufficient ways to find out what is calling it, and you return a certain version. Not that that doesn't still happen, but nowadays with different frameworks, you can actually return. You can use one format, one code base to work across multiple formats, which is great, right? But back to the wireframe here. Wireframe's just a way to just kind of, give yourself a, kind of a structure, and you just kind of keep on iterating it to build it out, right? But it's just a way to get started with things, okay? So let's talk about the universal design, the POR framework. W3Cs. So this is a standards body, has accessibility guidelines, frame accessibility as structured integrity. So accessibility is so that, some different people, some people might have certain thing visually impaired, hearing impaired, visually impaired. There's screen readers and so forth, and you can write your code in a way, right? If you do the things right, you write your code in a way that screen readers can read what's there, right? But you have to design it that way, and you have to code it that way. Okay, we'll obviously be talking about that a lot more here in the future. But basically, the POR framework is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Right. Perceivable is users must be able to perceive content with at least one sense. Right. So the application of that, provide alt text. So there's like an alt little attribute you can use for your images, right? So what happens is someone who can't see the image, right? You can have alt text so that a screen reader will read that, okay? And it also includes closed captions for videos, right? Operable. The interface must be interactive for all users, okay? Ensure full keyboard-only navigation, fully reachable via the tab key, okay? So there's also, and the guys, the people who were in the previous course, C#, we did a little bit of that tab stuff as well, right? It's a little different with the web, but you want to be able to tab. You can tab through a thing, and be able so that when they tab, the screen reader reads all those things, right? So you have to have that set up that way. Understandable. Content and operation are predictable and clear. So use plain language and maintain consistent navigation paths across the site. Robust. Okay. Works reliably across diverse technologies. Code is compatible with different browsers and assistive screen readers. So a long time ago, used to be a real pain. Things are so much easier nowadays for developers. Some things are harder, some things are easier. As far as working across multiple browsers, things are a lot easier nowadays. A long time ago, you used to have to do checks in your code. If this is and if this is Internet Explorer, use this. But standards bodies have really come a long way, and all these different companies who make browsers, such as Microsoft has Edge, Google has Chrome, Firefox, etc. They've all done they've all worked together a lot more so that they're a little more consistent on what they're doing. They're following the standards. A long time ago, the standards were a little disjointed, so to speak, and so some of the different companies were kind of doing their own thing. So it kind of led to a lot of problems and made things a lot more difficult for developers. But now they're kind of a lot more in sync, so that things work across different browsers a lot better now. You don't have to worry about it. It's almost kind of disappeared. But a long time ago, you used to have to do all kinds of special things you wrote it for one browser, then you had to do a bunch of things to get it to work in the other one. So that's a much better situation nowadays. Multi-platform adaptation, response design. So nowadays, over 50% of all web traffic is mobile, right? So, and a lot of these frameworks are like there's a framework called Bootstrap, right, for cascading style sheets, and we'll learn a little bit about that in this course. And so, it's a mobile first framework, right? Mobile first library. To design for different. Actually, you design for all the different ones, but you start. The concept is let's design for mobile first, and then from there let's build it out from there. Okay, you have to do some little things here and there, right? It's not you have to write some code for the other types of platforms, right? The different types of devices, right? But you design for the smallest screen first, right? Force the designers to prioritize essential content, right? Because that's one thing on you got a desktop, you can fit a lot of stuff on there. You can have a lot of things going on. Well, when you've got a mobile first website, you've got to make sure that the most important stuff, when someone gets to that page, it's right there. They get an idea of what's happening on that page. The most important things are there for them. Right? And there's things that you can just actually eliminate completely from that can be still in your code, but they'll be in your code base, but you can actually eliminate them from being displayed on a mobile device. So there's tools and resources to do that. Okay. Responsive design ensures one single site automatically adapts its layout to any screen constraint. Okay, the building materials ecosystem. Okay. Client side. So you got in a web application, a basic, unless you've got, we're going to be doing a lot of static sites here right? We're going to be doing things that just kind of run on your computer. It's not hitting a server or back end. But in the real world, you're really actually hitting a web server, right? We'll see a little. You'll get a little experience with that. But for the most part, we're really concentrating on creating those, creating all that code to run on the client, right? The client is the browser or the phone, right? So we're creating that for that purposes, mostly in this course, right? But in the real world, websites are usually not just static and are display only, right? They're doing things. You order something, right? So it's hitting some back-end server, right? Here it's showing PHP ASP. This was kind of one of the more, well, you will do some ASP stuff later in the second year. PHP we don't, not that there's not a lot of PHP around, but a lot of the newer frameworks, starting out from new stuff, not a lot of PHP stuff. Not that, it doesn't still happen, but PHP was kind of more the early web stuff, okay? And so you can do some little stuff on the back end, right? There's just so much more robust type languages that you can use on the server side nowadays, okay? And ASP.NET, you'll learn that in the second year. But here, basically, it's showing you the function. HTML is the structure, right? The function of it is the structure, the framing, the foundation, right? It's all structural, right? CSS is cascading style sheets. This is the appearance, the paint, the finishes, the layout, right? This is all the different styling to make it look nice, right? JavaScript adds interactivity. You can look at it as being the electricity and the moving parts, right? JavaScript adds a little bit of interactivity and stuff, right? And so basically, this is what's run inside in the browser, right? On the client side. This is what the user sees, right? This is what the user sees. User doesn't really know anything about the back end. They just know they click a button, some magic happens, and something gets done, right? But sorry, let me go back here. Crucial rule: the user only ever sees the final HTML generated by the server-side languages. Back-end logic remains hidden. So there you go. Okay. The structural units, the HTML anatomy. So here's what one of the tags look like, okay? This is paragraph tag. So all HTML tags will start with a less than sign, right? And then end with the greater than sign, right? Brackets, right? They all end in brackets, right? Some tags have an end tag, right? A complete end tag. Some of them do not. An image tag does not. Okay, but a paragraph does. A tag does. Right. So you have to end the begin paragraph tag with the end bracket here. Right. So you start with a begin bracket, you end with an end bracket for a paragraph tag. Then you have your content. Right. Then you have to end your paragraph tag. This is the end tag. Completes a paired element. Right. Also, there's the idea of attributes. There's different attributes, and in CSS, you use what's called class attributes, right? And so this class attributes, it's going to go look when you've got class intro. It's going to go look within the structure there. It's going to go look for an intro. Okay, it's going to look for a class called intro. If it and if it finds it, it's going to style. It's going to style this with that CSS, okay? Here is like I said, this is an image one. This one is a tags with no end tag because they insert objects rather than wrap content. An image, you're basically just pointing to a location, right? So obviously we'll talk about this in the future. It has to know where to find this. If this isn't a page, it has to be able to find this, okay? And we'll be talking about that in the future. But this is the source, so this is telling you the source of where it is, right? The source of where it is, what it's called, right? So logo.png, this is the image file, right? Best practice, modern standards dictate that all tags and attributes should be written in lowercase, okay? Now, in the real world, in a lot of browsers, such as, Chrome, etc., basically, for the most part, I prefer you use Chrome. I will be using Chrome. For this class, that's what we use. Not saying you have to, but some things we'll talk about might be a little more related to Chrome. But different browsers are really forgiving, especially with HTML. They try not to allow things to break. Because if they did, a lot of web pages, they're always web pages, got little errors on them. It tries just to work through it, so to speak, right? But, not that you can't mess things up, and you will, right? But it kind of is very forgiving, like it was saying, modern dictate that all attributes should be written lowercase. Sometimes it'll let you get away with other things as well and still render it. Rendering means displaying it, right? It'll still allow you to display. It'll still render it, but it's not really proper. It's not best practices. So really you want to stick all with lowercase. Obviously here you got content. Content doesn't matter. We're just talking about our tags, right? So this is erecting the frame, the document tree. So the very first entry with an HTML document is generally your doc type. Okay. And just by doing this, and I'll show you, I don't have it right here right now, and I don't want to go searching right now, but older versions, HTML5, this is how you tell the browser, hey, I'm using HTML5. Doesn't say number 5 in here, right? But older versions, they were done differently, okay? The doc type was different. It actually used to tell which version it was. This is the newer one, and almost everyone's using these, unless you go to some little maybe mom and pop static website from many years ago that's basically still working. That's probably not used much, but it might still be out there. That might be having a different doc type up here, right? But basically, this is the HTML5 standards, which is the most recent one. Okay, and we'll look into a little bit more. We'll definitely be looking into more what that all means, HTML5 standards. But this is basically the very first line in your HTML document. Okay, saying, hey, we're using HTML5, right? Well, it tells the browser to render it. That's basically what it's doing. It's telling it to render it. Then your beginning of your HTML document starts with the root wrapper, which is HTML, right? And so obviously you see this in OpenClaw. This ain't showing the end one, but you're also at the very end, you're going to have an end one as well, right? Anytime you've got these open ones like this, you're always going to have an end one, right? Unless it's a one that's self-encompassing, like the image one, right? That's a little different, right? We'll talk about which ones are and which ones aren't. But so within your HTML document, there's some things that are not always displayed. Okay, they're not always displayed, and they serve other purposes within the code, right? They serve certain purposes. So like there's the head section that's invisible to the user. Okay, and then there's a title, right? This appears in the browser tab. So if you ever look at your the top, at the top of your if Chrome, whatever, and you look, you have multiple tabs open. Whatever the title is, that's what will be in there. Okay, that's where it displays. Even though you put it in the code, but that's where it puts it, right? It puts it up there. Then there's also this different kind of what's called metadata. We'll talk about this more in the future as well. So you got different metadata that can be part. Okay, so this is like character encoding. So like everything we look at is basically English, but there's other languages that need a different character set to be able to display, right? So that's where you set things like that in meta tags. Okay. So these are kind of the hidden ones. Okay, and then there's the other tags here. Okay, even though they don't see the tag, they see the contents, right? So the body tag is a visible structure within your HTML document, right? Usually, it has other tags within it, right? Usually you've got a header tag, you have navigation, right? You have main tags, etc. Okay. And we'll be obviously getting into that and a lot more. Authoring tools. So there's different kinds of editors, okay? Different kinds of tools that can be used. Now, part of your setting up your environment asks you to download Notepad++. So this is considered a plain text environment, no advanced help, doesn't give you suggestions or anything like that, right? It's just kind of a for Notepad++, it's just kind of a more sophisticated Notepad, right? Just basically Windows Notepad, a little more sophisticated, right? I do use it a lot for a lot of little different simple things. I use it a lot, right? You can write HTML in there. It's not going to help you much. You're not going to know if you got an error in there, right? You can write it, save it, bring it up in a browser. If you did everything right, it'll display, right? So HTML can be written in a text editor, right? And it's not a bad idea to learn some raw basics of coding. Back in the day, that's what you kind of did. You wrote it in something really simple, and then you brought it up. Nope, you got an error, and you'd figure it out, right? Now, there's other editors as well. This is showing for HTML. This is VS Code. This is Visual Studio Code. This is what we're going to be using, right? But this one is now Visual Studio Code will work with a lot of different languages, not just HTML. But we're gonna be using Visual Studio Code for HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It can be used with lots of other languages as well. Okay, but and Visual Studio Code is probably about 75% of developers use Visual Studio Code. It's pretty significant, right? It's become very popular, and it's free, right? And we can add extensions to it. So if you've already set up your environment, you know a little bit about it already. So features, syntax color coding, has some autocomplete, some spell checks. It has some functionality in it, right? Best for professional hand coding and daily development. Okay. And there's other ones as well. Atom, brackets, these are some other ones as well. I suggest you stick with Visual Studio Code for this course, but if you're interested in looking at the others, that's fine as well. Also, there's what's called WYSIWYG. WYSIWYG. WYSIWYG stands as what you see is what you get. Okay, and I remember early days. I remember early days of many years ago. I don't want to date myself, but Adobe Dreamweaver has been around for many years. I thought it was really cool too. It's a lot of drag and drop stuff. You just drag something here, you drag it there, and it'll create all the code. Drop an image in there, it creates the code for it, right? Move things around, move your header, move your footer, right? Move it in different directions, and so it's a drag and drop, kind of writes the code for you, right? Rapid visual layouts without manually typing HTML, right? So, there's some benefits, but you have less control over things, right? And for real developers, you really don't want to, not really the best tool. You could use other things, right? So, but that's called the WYSIWYG. That's one of probably the more popular ones. Obviously, I can't even think of some other ones for the HTML stuff, but I'm sure there are. But it's interesting. If you ever get a chance, you can try it out, check it out just to see how it works. And then you have called online editors, where you actually, you're logging into a web page called CodePen, Replit. You can just actually log in. It's a browser-based environment. You can write your code right there within the browser itself. And it's good for sometimes team collaboration and coding from any computer. So, right. So, if you go somewhere, you go to use a public library or something, and you could log in and write some code, right? So you don't necessarily need to bring your computer and everything on it with it. Yeah, right. Also, that HTML. So HTML down here, platform independence. HTML written on Windows works flawlessly on Mac, Linux, or mobile devices. Okay. So, it's definitely cross-platform by itself, right? Now, some other things, we learned, students who took C# last semester, things are a little more complicated when you're trying to write for different platforms, right? A little more complicated. But, HTML is pretty much, basically you write HTML, on a Windows, then you went to your Mac, everything's going to be the same, right? It's still going to work. The final inspection, best practices. Okay, so design practices and coding habits. So for design practices, utilize active white space for emphasizing, and passive white space for text readability. So that's all depends on, when you're coding, sometimes you want to have spaces in some areas. You want to, have it in a certain format so it's easy to read, right? So you want to do that. You don't want to cram everything together so it can't be read, right? limit typography to 1 to 2 fonts. So you don't want to, you want to ensure high contrast between text and background, right? So you can just, you choose different fonts, right? So you don't want to go crazy, like having 10 different fonts on a page, right? It usually doesn't help. Well, okay. Keep navigation placement consistent and visible on every page. Design practices, design the smallest mobile screen first, and then go from there, okay? Coding habits, name the homepage index.html. So that's very important, and especially later on when we do get to when we do create our web portfolio, we're going to deploy that on GitHub pages, which is called GitHub.io. And when we do that, what it's going to look for in that root directory, wherever, when you have it in there, it's going to look for index.html. If you don't have an index.html, it's not going to work. So it's kind of the universal server default, okay? So that's kind of all servers kind of know what the index.html file is, right? And so that's what they know to display by default, right? So also, as far as coding habits, indent nested elements structurally to ensure code readability. Always write meaningful alt text. So we're going to learn what all this is. This is just high level. Alt text for screen readers and accessibility. So you could have alt text for your image. So if a user is visually impaired, they can understand what that image is about because you have alt text in there, right? Declare UTF-8 encoding in the head to prevent broken text characters. So we'll talk more about UTF-8. It's one of the encoding options, and we'll discuss that more in the future. Just telling you basically to make sure that you have that, okay? So great web design marries precise technical infrastructure with empathetic user planning. Okay, so that's that for that. How much time we have? I want to go through this, not that one. So a little bit of this be redundant, but not too much. So understanding the internet, we kind of talked about all these things. But we're going to look at a little bit more. This is going to have a little bit more depth here. So the internet is the largest computer network. It's a global system that links billions of devices so they can share information. The World Wide Web, or simply the web, is just one service that runs on top of the internet. Right? Other internet services include email, file transfer, texting. Yep, texting's another one. I didn't even mention that one. So texting uses a different protocol, right? Text, email, file transfer, texting, voice over IP. Them all use different protocols that run on top of the internet. HTTP is the language of the web, right? The web uses HTTP, HTTPS, right? When I say HTTP, I kind of mean both of them together, just because really everything really should be HTTPS. But so that's one of the protocols that run on the internet, right? Just one of them. Many people think the internet and web is interchangeable, and that's what we're kind of mentioning here, right? But they're not the same. The internet is a infrastructure. It's about the cables, the routers, the servers, right? Everything else is these services that run on top of the infrastructure, right? Just like we're mentioning here. And the web is a collection of linked documents that travels across that infrastructure. Internet building blocks. So a node is any device connected to a network, such as a computer, a phone, a printer, smart thermostat, etc., right? A network is a group of nodes connected so they can share resources and communicate, right? So like within your house, you can have things set up where you can share things within your own network, right? Companies do that to share files and certain on their own network, right? Data lines are the physical lines, fiber optic cables, wireless, satellite, right? that carry data between the nodes. Internet service provider sells across access to the internet and connects homes and businesses to the internet backbone. The internet backbone is a collection of high-speed data lines that link major computer systems worldwide. Internet of Things, everyday objects, appliances. So Internet of Things is pretty much kind of a new term that came in. I don't want to say new term, been around for a while, but Internet, once other things started connecting to the internet, in the beginning it was just a computer. You could connect to the internet, right? Then phones were connecting to the internet. Then all of a sudden, appliances and vehicles and wearables, etc., sensors, right, started all being part of the internet. So that's where the Internet of Things came in, the whole concept, right? So World Wide Web's interconnected documents. A web page is a single document on the web, right? That may contain text, images, video, links, etc. Right? A website is a group of related web pages stored under one domain, right? It's the domain names. Remember we looked at that. So a website website is a collection of web pages within a domain. Homepage, that's the default one. That's where you have the index.html, right? That should be your homepage, should be called index.html. Hyperlink. Hyperlink is a clickable, it could be any clickable text, image, region that jumps to another resource on the web, right? Protocol. Protocol is a set of rules that computers follow to talk to each other. Without agreed upon protocols, a laptop in Missouri and a server in Tokyo would have no way to exchange data reliably, right? Here's our different protocols we're talking about. And I'm trying to get through this. So I'm just kind of skip over this, but think of the TCP/IP like a postal system. A large package, your data gets split into smaller envelopes, packets. Each envelope is addressed, routed independently, and reassembled when they arrive at the destination. Pretty fascinating, especially on how quickly that happens, right? Server clients and DNS, kind of talked about that. Basically, a client makes a request to the server, and the server sends a response back to the client. DNS sits in between them, so it takes a domain name and converts that into an IP address, so it knows where that is, right? Humans find numbers hard to remember, so we use domain names, right? Early days, very, very early days, you had IP addresses, and you had to know which IP address was for what, right? Then we started domain names, right? So domain names point to a certain IP address, right? Every domain name does. It's the internet's phone book, right? The anatomy of URL. So remember, the first part is always the protocol, right? Then remember, you've got the domain name. So at the minimum, you're going to have a domain name, and you're going to have the top level domain being .com. It's the most popular one, but you also have .edu, .net, .info, etc. Right? There's many, many more just because we start running out of domain names. So, and then basically this is the path, right? So this is taking you, this is the subdomain, right? This is an area within a domain, and then here is the path. So this is the path to the resource you're really looking for, right? Types of websites, talked about that. The internet site, right? It's public facing. Intranet is a private network inside an organization, accessible, usually like only to employees, right? The extranet is an extension of the intranet, right? That gives access to trusted outside partners, usually, right? Suppliers, partners, key customers, right? Within those categories, websites serve many purposes, right? Planning a website. So the 3 planning questions: what is your purpose? Who is your audience? And what does success look like, right? Wireframes and sitemaps. So a wireframe is just a simple sketch of a single page layout showing where the header, navigation. This is what you use early on, right? This is kind of the pre-work, right? Before you start coding. You should always be planning things. So a wireframe is just a simple sketch. It could be, we looked at the mobile one, but you can do it, you're basically going to do it for all three, right? Or, well, the big three, I would say, the big three is a phone and a tablet and a web browser, right? A desktop. A diagram, a sitemap is a diagram showing all the pages in a site and how they link together. A sitemap gives you the big picture view before you build. You don't need fancy software to do it. Basically, back in the day, people just sit down, and I'm sure people still do it to today, nothing wrong with it. Sit down and just kind of sketch things out. Maybe they take a picture of it. Nowadays you can take it and take that picture and turn that into something even, right? So there's a lot you can do, but there's also tools out there to do it, and we'll look at those as well. Website structures, linear structures, kind of in sequence. You do one thing before you do the other. Hierarchical is a kind of a tree-like structure, right? Usually like a home page, and then you have an about page and services, right? It's best for sites with distinct categories, okay? Webbed is things are no set order. Visitors can jump all around. Usually it's a wiki. A wiki is basically a page with links to other pages that are links to other pages. It's all interconnected, right? Design principles. Content is important, but how the content looks determines whether visitors stay or leave. So the 4 design areas deserve attention on every site. Basic your graphics, images, visual appeal, etc. Navigation, can they move around, right? I'm sure everyone's gone to something, you can't find something quickly, right? It might be there on the, there might be some way to get to it, but if you can't figure it out pretty quickly, you're out of there, right? So if you got clear, consistent navigation, users are going to use your site, right? Typography, font choices, size, right? Readability, mood, right? There's a lot that goes into that, right? There's the whole idea of user experience, and actually there's roles that people do that actually kind of specialize in areas like that. No, you want to do it this way and that way, depending on your user, depending on lots of different things, right? Color, just suggesting pick a small coordinated color palettes. We'll look, I'll show you some palettes in the future here. So where we can kind of select from palettes. So you want to you don't want to just grab a purple and a green, and you probably should use a palette that kind of all fits together, right? White space. So active. So white space. So active white space is deliberate empty area used to emphasize an element or group of related items. Passive white space is small gaps between letters, lines, and paragraphs that make the text easier to read. Okay. Responsive multi-platform design. The whole idea of responsive design is an approach where a single website adapts its layout to fit the size of the visitor screen, right? So that the image will resize, the column stack, things change for that specific device, right? And obviously the mobile first is a really good perspective nowadays. More than half of all web traffic now comes to mobile phone. So you design the smallest screen first, right? And then so you make sure that it prioritizes what's most important. Then the other versions, you can kind of do some things different. You can have additional things, right? Different options. Accessibility, we talked about that. The poor concept, right? Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So you want to design your code and design everything so that it works with people who have different impairments and different challenges, right? And then the World Wide Web Consortium we're going to look at all this stuff more in detail later. Publishes a web content accessibility guidelines. They're built around these 4 principles, right? Always write alt text. Talked about that. HTML fundamentals, right? Is hypertext markup language, HTML, right? It's the standard language for creating web pages. HTML is a markup language, not a programming language. I did not mention that before, but HTML is not really a programming language. Okay, it's considered a markup language. Another one is called XML, which is extensible markup language. We'll look at that a little bit too, and eventually in this course. But HTML is a markup language, not a programming language. JavaScript's programming language. C#, that's a programming language, right? But HTML is what's considered a markup language, right? It uses tags to describe the structure and meaning of content rather than instructions for a computer to execute, right? So with HTML, you have tags, elements, and attributes. A tag is a special keyword surrounded by the angle brackets that tell the browser how to treat content, right? We looked at a little bit of a paragraph tag. We're going to look at a lot more. Paragraph tag, heading tag, or an image tag, right? Gives you some information about, hey, this is what this is, right? Element, a complete unit made up of a start tag, the content end tag, the complete element, right? Is all of it. The element is what you actually place in the document. Attribute is an extra piece of information inside a tag that configures how it behaves. Examples include language of the page or the source of an image. We see the src tag. We also had that class tag we've seen on that paragraph tag, the p tag, which is a paragraph tag. We had a class, which is actually about style sheets, but that gave information. That class, that name is an attribute, right? Paired versus void tags, a paired tag. So a paired tag is like a paragraph tag, a headings tag, a links tags, right? When you've got a begin tag, when you have a start tag, you also have to have a matching end tag, right? An empty tag, which is a void tag, has no end tag because it has no content. It just marks a location or inserts something. So we'll look at these, and a line break, a horizontal rule, an image, a meta tag, right? These are all empty tags. Basically use lowercase. That's all that's saying. HTML versions has gone through several versions over the years. The current standard is HTML5. It's important for 3. It started adding what's called semantic structure elements. So before, you used to have to do like what they call a div tag, where you'd have a div, and then you'd say class equals header, class equals nav, class. But they were all div tags. So then they started saying, well, everybody uses a header. Let's create a header tag. Everybody uses navigation. Let's create a nav tag. And then they have a main tag, an article tag, section tag, footer tag. So these all became new tags that describe something within that document, right? They describe what the region of the content means, right? Early HTML really didn't, they were just tags. You have a paragraph tag. Yeah, well, that's a paragraph tag, but it really didn't describe things quite like a semantic tag saying this is a header. Well, a header is going to be at the top, right? A footer is going to be at the bottom, right? It gives you some certain information. It's more descriptive, right? Native and audio video tag. There's also audio and video tags, right? That can be used without having browser plugins. Mobile app friendly. HTML was designed with phones and tablets in mind. I already mentioned, we'll look at this, XML, which is an extensible markup language, and it's a companion to HTML designed to transport. This is more about data storage. XML tags aren't generally used for, basically in browsers, right? XHTML is a stricter version of HTML written using XML rules, right? But this one is, right? It's basically taking XML and it's making it so it can be used for HTML purposes, right? Other web languages. HTML handles structure, But modern websites use several other languages to add style, interactivity, and server-side logic. And we'll learn these in the future. We already mentioned cascading style sheets and JavaScript. jQuery is basically a JavaScript library. We probably won't be using PHP, but we'll talk about it a little bit. You will be learning ASP.NET in the second year, so that will be relevant. Client side versus server side. Client side code runs inside the visitor's browser. Server side code runs on the web server, right? And the visitor only ever sees what's in the HTML. We talked about web authoring tools, basically text editors, HTML editors. Text editors was like the Notepad++, text editor, HTML editor, Visual Studio Code, what you're using, WYSIWYG, Dreamweaver, them just drag and drop, right? You don't even have to code. And then also online code editors, just browser-based. You can put the code right in the browser, right? Popular tools, we've already discussed, platform independent. HTML is platform independent, right? A file created in Windows can be viewed on a Mac, Linux, etc. Structure of a basic web page. We talked about the very first line being the doc type. It says, hey, this is saying, hey, this is doc type. This is HTML5, right? It's communicating that to the browser, right? HTML is always the root element, right? And then you can have some other elements as well. We talked about the head one is actually, even though it's in the code, the users don't see anything that's in there, right? Usually whatever's in the body, the user's going to see. They're not going to see the tag, but they're going to see what kind of content's in there, right? Which one each one does. Kind of talked about that. This is the root element, wraps the entire page, right? You're always going to have an end. The very first, after your doc type, your very first one is going to be that. Your very last one is going to be this one never gets closed, okay? This never one gets closed. This always gets closed. You have a beginning tag, and at the very end, your last one is going to be an end tag, okay? Head is information about the page that isn't directly shown, such as a title, character encoding, linked style sheets, meta tags. We'll learn a lot more about that in the future. Title, a title appears in the browser tab, also in bookmarks and search results as well. Okay. Meta tag provides information about the page, such as encoding, description, viewport. We'll learn about what all those mean and when we use those. Body, everything the visitor actually sees, right? All right, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future. Just realize that, UTF stands for Unicode Transformation Format. Basically, it's about, being able to display text from different languages, right? And by using UTF, you can use that as a single encoding system, okay? Best practices, always use lowercase, indent nested elements, always close paired tags, give every image meaningful alt text, save your home page as index.html, test in more than one browser. Okay? Nowadays, not as important as it used to be, but still do. And you want to check it on your phone as well. All right, I'm not going to go through these. You can review this. You have access to that. So that's all I have for this. There's probably going to be a few things I'm going to want to go over from chapter 1. And I'll just just a handful of things just to make sure that we round out everything, get everything covered. Didn't have time for the written test today, so I will go ahead and we'll do that first thing tomorrow. So we'll do the written test and then move on to chapter 2 items. Okay. We'll do the written test. Yeah, we're also going to do some assignments, other assignments, written test, and some of those book assignments to for chapter 1. So we'll do them tomorrow in class. So that's all I have. Have a great day. If you have any questions, if you have any problems with getting started, setting up your environment, please let me know, and I will schedule some time to help you. I don't mind. That's what I'm here for. So thanks, and take care.